Now it's time for Call You and Yours with Julian Warwicker in Salford.
The blunt truth is that men still run the world. The words of one of the top international female executives, Sheryl Sandberg, the chief operating officer of Facebook. Yes, she has a book to sell, a point which some of her critics have highlighted. But her view that the equality revolution in the workplace has stalled, that women face real obstacles, including blatant and subtle sexism, but also that women lower their own expectations of what they can achieve, has prompted fierce debate.
I'm not suggesting women are ambitious. Plenty of women are as ambitious as men. But I am saying, and I want to say it unequivocally and unapologetically, that the data is clear that when it comes to ambition to lead, to be the leader of whatever you're doing, men, boys outnumber girls and women. I'm not blaming women. My message is not one of blaming women. There's an awful lot we don't control. I am saying that there's an awful lot we can control and we can do for ourselves to sit at more tables, raise more hands.
Well, that was Sheryl Sandberg speaking to CBS's 60 Minutes in the United States. There are other elements to add to today's discussion. A Chartered Management Institute report published at the end of last week pointed to pay gaps, the wrong role models, and a lack of self-confidence as being among the challenges holding back female managers in the UK. And their point wasn't just about equality. They argued that having more women at the top makes good business sense because firms do better with diversity. Then there's the view within government. I stand at the dispatch box on a regular basis, and the commentary about what was being discussed can get overshadowed by what colour outfit I was wearing. The words of the Culture Secretary, Maria Miller. Does she have a point? And then there was the charter signed by the Queen last night, which commits the 54 countries of the Commonwealth to oppose all forms of discrimination. Will that make a difference? And before you think this discussion is all going in one direction, what about this viewpoint from a woman who chose to leave a position of power, in this case Anne-Marie Slaughter, the first female director of policy planning at the United States State Department, who said this: "It's time to stop fooling ourselves. The women who have managed to be both mothers and top professionals are superhuman, rich or self-employed. In other words, the vast majority can't have it all." What are your views and experiences? 03700 100 444 is the phone number. A call will cost you the same as to an 01 or an 02 number. You can email you and yours at bbc.co.uk. You can text to 84844, and if you do that, we'll charge you your standard operator message rate, and we may call you back on that number. Or you can tweet at Radio 4 using the hashtag you and yours. Diana Innes is in Brighton. Diana, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What would you like to say on this?
Well, that comment that women can't have it all, maybe they don't want it all. I think there's a tendency to assume that we are all the same. We're not all the same. And women do not certainly all want the same things. They don't all want to be Prime Minister or whatever. They really don't. They're not all frustrated politicians, frustrated this, that or the other. They're not.
But for
They're
those
quite happy with their lot.
For those who do want to get to the top, do you think that there are still significant obstacles that are getting in their way?
Well, of course, there must be. And the same would apply to a lot of men. You see, this thing that we are so badly off, and we're sitting at home frustrated, biting our nails because we want to be doing all sorts of things that we can't do. I don't think that's true. I think there are a lot of women who are perfectly happy to be, well, in the olden days it would be called second-class citizens. I don't like that phrase at all. I don't believe it. But, you know, that there's an assumption that we feel that we're second-class citizens, and perhaps we don't. We're quite happy with our lot.
Diana, thanks for kicking us off. 03700 100 444. Diana mentions the male point of view. Andrew Hill's on the line, a Financial Times journalist who wrote in today's paper, because I have it alongside me, under a heading, "Work-life balance is not just for women." Andrew, do you want to expand on that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think actually Sheryl Sandberg's book, which I highly recommend, talks about the need to have women and men given the opportunity to move ahead without impediments and preconceptions holding them back. And my particular take on this from today's column in the FT was that the work-life balance issue is one that actually applies to both genders. It's not a gender-specific issue, and importantly, I think, if benefits are being extended to women as they should be in order to, for sheer equity reasons, because obviously they have been held back in the workplace, we have to encourage men to take these up as well, because otherwise that generates internal resentment. Companies find that they have splits along gender lines within the workplace, and it amounts to a setback to the objective of giving women more equality at work.
I was quite struck by one of the comments that you wrote. If employees lean in, you wrote, and that's a reference obviously to the advice that Sheryl Sandberg gives, only to keel over onto the boardroom table out of fatigue, something is wrong. In other words, if we're all trying to get to the top, but we're doing it at the expense of everything else in our lives, what do we ultimately gain from that?
Yeah, I think that is a problem, and I think the issue that I'm trying to address, which Sheryl Sandberg in her book deliberately says that she's not addressing, she's really talking about the personal commitment people have to make, and women in particular. The issue that I was trying to get at was that there is an institutional problem here, and that it is the responsibility of managers and management structures in some ways to sort of protect people from themselves. We're beginning to see some evidence, I think, that this is being recognised. Both the chief executive of Lloyds Banking Group and the chief executive of Akzo Nobel in the Netherlands have had to take leave of absence in the last couple of years because of exhaustion. They might not even have admitted to that in previous eras. Both are men, of course.
Indeed. I also wanted to mention to you, and we're going to have a guest from the Chartered Management Institute in a moment, sort of adding flesh to the bones of the report that I quoted. But would you argue as well that there is a very strong business case for getting to a much more equal state of play at the top of business in this country?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think actually that is the critical point for businesses, which is that it's simply madness for any business to ignore half the talent pool and to inadvertently, in most cases, to avoid having structures in place that keep women and men in the workforce and don't drive them, for whatever reason, out of the structure. Some, as your first caller said, may not want to. Both men and women may not want to progress to the top, but they need the structures in place to allow them to do that.
Andrew, thanks very much. Andrew Hill of the Financial Times. Anna Kronschnabel is on the line from Bristol, Chief Executive and owner of a computer games company. Anna, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What's your perspective on all this, having reached the top of a world which is largely seen as being very male-dominated?
Well, I think, unfortunately, it is still very much a male-dominated industry. There are women in marketing and sales, which I think can take it up to about 10% at times. But basically, there's about 4% of women involved in the development of computer games currently, which is a really dire statistic, I think.
What have you had to do to get to the top?
I had to set up my own company.
So if you try to stay within the wider picture, you wouldn't have got to where you are?
It's hard to say, because my background is in setting up businesses partly anyway, so that's my experience. But generally, I am not what people expect to see, which is a woman in her 40s involved in the development of computer games. It's a very still quite young and very male environment. And I think that's reflected in the kind of products that are made, the kind of games that we see around us.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Is there anything in the theory that says because men are by and large the ones creating these games, that partly explains why men are by and large the ones playing them? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, people make the kind of products that they want to see, partly as well, the kind of products that they want to make. I think it's really fascinating that we now see more and more women playing games, but they're playing mobile games a lot more. They're not playing the kind of what some of the larger companies would see as prestigious AAA titles, and those are the games that involve running around deserts with very large guns.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. There are companies like, there's a guy called Genova Chen, who is involved in quite a lot of research, and he's made some fantastic games. He made a game called Journey, which is much more about finding your own path. But that's really very different to the kind of games we're still seeing, which involve guns and fighting and all the rest of it. And that's what a lot of these youngish kind of blokes want to want to play themselves.
One other point I wanted to raise with you, and I will try and do it as delicately as I can, but it's this idea that there are certain characteristics that are perhaps almost certainly too often attributed to each gender. To get to the very top, there is a theory out there that for a woman, she has to behave on occasions more like a man. Is there anything in that?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, I'm used to working in a male environment, and women have to take on the attributes of the people around them. I couldn't walk into a meeting and be tentative and say, well, I was wondering about this and I feel this and I think this, in the ways that a lot of women are used to talking. I have to be very blunt and straightforward, and it doesn't necessarily go down very well at the end of the day. I've been accused of being unfeminine and aggressive, and I don't think you can actually win under those circumstances. And at the end of the day, a lot of blokes don't want to listen to older women telling them what to do. It's a very young male industry, and it's very hard to know what can be done about that.
Interesting. Thanks for calling. 03700 100 444. Lots of comments coming in via text, via Twitter. The very nature of this debate hangs on a male paradigm, writes this correspondent, and definition of success as being high-paid business leaders. How about we think of success in terms of good health, happiness and the impact we have on others' lives? That's signed by Caitlin, mum of two, on maternity leave in Cardiff. Pauline McColl's in the phone room. Pauline, what do you have?
Yes, also on Twitter, Julian Cheshire, Kaz says, on that very theme, current social and business models hold us all back. Success, by their definitions, look increasingly unhealthy. Gabriella Clark at Prams in the Park on Twitter says, not being in a job you are passionate about might be influencing this. Not everyone, though, is fortunate enough to do this. On Facebook, Paul McMahon says, women perceive reality in a completely different way to men. It's that perspective that's needed so desperately in positions of power in the world right now. But on Sheryl Sandberg's views about men still ruling the world, Beth Billison on Facebook says, so what's new?
Pauline, thank you. Let me go to Jane in Banbury with a nurse's perspective on this. Jane, good afternoon. Hello, Jane, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you nice and clear. Thank you.
What point did you want to make here?
Well, in nursing, most nurses, there are a few male nurses, but most nurses are actually still female. However, when you come to nurse managers are disproportionately more male. And from my own perspective, I haven't asked all the other female nurses why they haven't gone for positions in management. But the reason why I haven't is because the hours are so inflexible and sort of quite antiquated, really. For example, as a nurse manager, you're often expected to work, sort of 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours longer than your allotted shift in order, if things come up and you need to get things done. And when I asked about this, I was told, well, that's just part of the job. But when you're actually responsible for childcare and you have to pick up a child either from a school or from a childcare provider such as an after-school club, if you don't pick up that child, you would have social services hammering on your door. It's just simply not an option. And it seems to me that the employers don't always really understand this.
Jane, thanks for making that point. 03700 100 444. Anne Franke is Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, who's reporting to this issue I quoted a moment ago. And Dr. Julie Verity is a business consultant, writer, lecturer, who has split her working life between academia and the commercial world. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Anne Franke, points you might want to pick up on the strength of callers you've heard so far.
Yes, I think the points raised are all excellent. The first caller mentioned not everyone wants to get to the top, but as Andrew from the FT was saying, we need to make sure we have the structures in place to enable people to do that. And if I turn to, for example, the nurse, she was raising the issue of flexible working. Now, flexible working benefits everyone, women and men. We know that. That's what the research says. And more enlightened companies are embracing that. That helps women to advance. Sheryl Sandberg is right. The equality agenda has stalled. It's reflected in pay. It's reflected in women's progress. And yet, very paradoxically, more diversity would produce not only more successful businesses, but to the other social media points, happier, healthier workplaces.
Is she also right to say that women lower their own expectations of what they can achieve?
This does unfortunately happen, and it's very interesting to note that many more girls get higher A-star grades at school, for example, than boys. But when they then go into the workplace and they have a bad experience, their confidence takes a knock, and they embrace what's been known as the Paula principle, which is that they'll only rise to the level below their level of competence, and the main reason for that is a lack of confidence.
Yes, that's something that Tom Schuller, the writer, has looked at, isn't it? Because I've got it in front of me here. It's sort of he's put a mirror up against the Peter principle, which suggests exactly the opposite that he was then applying to men when it was first devised, of course.
Absolutely.
And now says that, as you say, women are effectively underreaching themselves. Yes. Julie Verity, what points did you want to raise at this stage?
Fascinating discussion. My understanding is about women's psychology and men's psychology, which are fundamentally different. And if you understand this very fundamental stuff that's going on in our brains, then we would be able to explain these things that are going on, as all your people have in their behaviours and what they've observed and experienced in organisations. So
different in what ways?
Well, men really are great game players. They love tournaments. They love competitions. They love going for goals and setting targets. They're very single-minded and can shut off everything around them, put themselves in boxes, and they like defining their roles and their tasks very closely. All those things are the things that men have built into organisations.
But aren't some of those things some of the sweeping generalisations that I was being slightly wary of only a few moments ago?
Of course, there is natural diversity amongst all biological populations. But a male brain, typically, just like we say, typically men are bigger and stronger than women. So, of course, we're averaging out things here. But male brains are just wired differently from female brains. And because of the great advances in science now, we can actually bring out these differences, see them, prove them. And we know that women's brains are wired to multitask, to act collaboratively, to listen more intently. Women are much wanting to share things, to break boundaries down. So women just really want to work in a completely different way.
In which case, take us to the caller from Bristol who runs her own computer games company, when she was talking about the fact that she has been accused of being less feminine in order to get to the top. What's going on there?
Well, the thing is that when women start behaving as men do, or start crossing those boundaries into typical male roles, men don't like it. They think it's weird. It's not what they expect of women.
Let me bring a caller in that will have an interesting take on what you've just said. Not her real name, Mary in Liverpool. Good afternoon, Mary.
Hi.
Your experience in banking is fascinating here. Tell us more.
I feel that it's the women themselves that stop women progressing with their organisations. I've been with my organisation for over 23 years, and I've always had tremendous career opportunities and progression, which have been recently stalled, having worked for women in the organisation.
Stalled in what way? What have they done? What's been going on that presumably is quite subtle, but you're convinced it's there?
Absolutely. I mean, bringing on the point about psychology and the way women behave, they seem the higher they get, it seems to me that they become a lot more threatened by other women. They become frightened that you might be after their jobs, much more so than a man would. And I find that when they're put in a position where they feel threatened by somebody who clearly wants to progress, then they become defensive, which makes them much more aggressive. I have been bullied by women in the organisation that I work for, never been bullied by a man. I've been commented by women in my organisation about what I wear, about my appearance. You will wear stilettos. Well, actually, I don't want to wear stilettos. I don't have to wear stilettos. It's never a man that said that. It's always been the women in higher positions that have put me off, to the point now where I really don't want to go there.
Stay there. I want to bring Anne Franke in to react briefly to that first. Anne, have you come across that sort of story before?
Well, yes, and I think it was Madeleine Albright who said hell has a special place for women who don't help other women. But to the points of bullying, let's face it, 70% of people in the UK have been bullied in the workplace, so clearly there are a lot of male bullies as well.
But what about the idea of women deliberately blocking other women?
That I have heard that before. Equally, I think you will find that men also deliberately block other women. The interesting thing that was raised about the psychology is, I think, very relevant, because what we're really talking about is what sorts of cultures exist at the top of organizations, and they are indeed, as was described, inherently male cultures, and that's what people are conforming to. So that's what needs to change.
Grace Horn in Sheffield, come in on this conversation. You're one of the few female knife makers in the world, I'm reading here.
Yes, I am.
And how have you found the workplace against that backdrop?
Well, I am self-employed, so
Right.
generally my interaction with other people is trying to explain what I do. And actually, when I tell a male what I do, generally the reaction is, "Oh, cool. What sort of stuff do you do?" Whereas so it's definitely the emphasis is on what I do rather than what gender I am. Whereas if I tell women what I do, it tends to result in puzzlement. And they actually tend to assume that I make kitchen knives, because kitchen knives are female and domestic. But I don't. So.
Julie Verity, you were talking about psychology. What's your take on that?
Fascinating. I do think that women, when they learn to play men's roles, do actually sometimes flip to take on those roles rather excessively, and really don't know how to manage being in those roles. So take it too far, almost. You know.
Let me read this text message to you. I'll be interested to hear some general reaction to this. Andy in Kent writes, "I'm working today in a cold, dirty car repair shop. I don't see many women in this grotty game. Do you want equality or just the glory jobs?"
This is true too. Men, the research does show that men do more dangerous and more dirty, horrid jobs than women do. Women choose not to do those things. Women do make choices about what they do.
Mary, what choice are you now going to make on the strength of what you've experienced in the world of banking?
Keep my head down and my mouth shut.
But stay in banking or move away?
It's difficult to move anywhere at the moment, to be honest. I love my organisation. I love working for my organisation, and I would love to progress. So I just hope things might change. I don't know. But they are my blockers from progressing my career, which I've always thoroughly enjoyed.
We are going to hear a voice from the world of banking, a female voice from the world of banking, in the second half of the programme, so stay tuned. Alice McGregor in Nottingham. Good afternoon, Alice.
Good afternoon.
What's your perspective on this?
Well, my perspective is that, I've come from quite a high achieving background of going to university. I did arts degree at university and then did an MA and diploma in social work. And I kind of always achieved what I set out to achieve. And then I was working as a specialist mental health worker with homeless people when I got pregnant with my first child, and kind of stuck with that job for another 8 years beyond when it was really what I wanted to do, I think, partly because I didn't have the headspace to work out what I did want to do, but partly, because of looking after children, but also partly because of being really frightened of not having an identity. And part of that was because my husband was going from strength to strength in his career that I started him off in, really, by sort of supporting him financially. And actually that had a really massive impact on me, and it was one of the reasons why I ended up having a breakdown. Was he'd got everything he wanted, and I was kind of stuck, and I couldn't work out what was going on. So I've decided, after having a third child, I've decided not to go back to work, though I am on maternity leave at the moment, and really, really enjoying just focusing on family life and spending really good quality time with my children, and being part of a local community more than I've been before, and not feeling torn in so many different directions.
So you sound quite happy with the decision you've eventually arrived at?
Really happy. I mean, I have now worked out what I'd like to do in the future, because I've kind of realised actually I was kind of intellectually squashed by the job that I'd had, and I'd kind of forgotten that actually I'm really intelligent. So I know what I want to do in the future, but the point is that I'm having the opportunity now to just do family life, but also I've given myself the headspace to work out what I do want to do.
I can hear somebody else who wants to chip in at this point. Alice, thanks for the call. I want to bring both my guests in briefly before we hear about the world at one and then take it forward. We're going to have a look at the sort of international perspective in the second half of the programme. Julie Verity, are you one of those who says quotas at the top?
Definitely, yes. I think it's the only way that we will get women to equal numbers. And when we are equal at the top, businesses will be better.
And are women necessarily in favour of quotas at the top?
No, they're not. No, all the evidence
that's your problem,
says,
isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Women want to be selected. They don't want to put their hands up and move forward. They want to be chosen because they're good. Women are very much more interested in prestige than status. They want to just do a great job and be recognised for doing a great job.
And Franke, what's your view on that specifically?
Right. On quotas, actually, we don't advocate quotas, but what we do advocate is measurement, because what gets measured gets done. So, for example, if companies set targets for how many women they'd like to have at the lower, middle, and upper levels of their organizations and monitor those targets and publish them, then that will change. And then things can be a bit more change from within rather than quotas, which I fear will lead to a backlash of against women.
More to come from my guests and from you, 03700 100 444, after we've heard about the world at one with Martha Carney. Martha.
Hi, Julian. Well, on today's programme, we've got figures showing that a government pilot project to pay housing benefit directly to claimants rather than to their landlords has led to some people getting behind with their rent. I'll be talking to the Welfare Minister. Ed Sturton is going to join us live from Rome, where the Cardinals will begin election of a new pope this afternoon. They've been celebrating a final mass before going into the conclave. And heavy snow is continuing to cause travel problems in southern England. We'll have the latest on the disruption. That's all in half an hour.
Martha, thank you. Let's go to the phone-in room. Pauline McCole, more comments from you.
This on an email. Christine says, I managed a large division of a large company with 40 women and 6 men reporting to me. When I advertised for a deputy, all 6 of the men applied and only 1 of the women, and that was because her husband told her to. Women lack confidence in the workplace, she says. Carol Charlton also tweets to say, we do need to build the confidence of our young women so they can go out and get what they want. I only found my confidence late in life. And Gillian, a senior executive bank executive, has this tale. She's now an at-home mum after 15 years of the corporate pole. It's not possible to do it all, she says. If both partners work in demanding careers, something just has to give. And she ends her email with this point. I noticed that even in my husband, who after 4 years as a stay-at-home dad, has now blithely returned to work with nary a backward glance at the kids, while I missed them dreadfully when I was working my 90 hours a week. There are structural barriers, she says, but social conditioning is as significant.
Pauline, thank you. I'm also reading some comments doubting that male brains are wired differently, but I think we might get too distracted if we explore that in too much depth. Eleanor Mills is associate editor at the Sunday Times, where she also writes a regular column. Eleanor, good afternoon.
Hi.
Has the revolution towards equality in the workplace stalled?
Well, I think there's some evidence that it has. Certainly, recently, if you look at the kind of top measure, which is the FTSE 100, we're now down to 2 women CEOs. There were 4 last year, so that's looking bad. And I think also kind of certainly anecdotally, or if I look around where I work, there seem to be less women, if anything, than there were 15 years ago.
Is that in part, because I've read a report suggesting this morning, down to the economic situation more broadly across the country?
Well, there are certainly some experts. For instance, Sylvia Hewlett, who's a big expert on this in America, she talks about men circling the wagons when things get tough. So they're much less likely to take a punt on a woman in senior management when things are looking dicey. They tend to go for grey hair old chaps, the kind of chaps pulled together.
I know you went to New York recently for a conference. I think it was an event organised by the Centre for Talent Innovation. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
What sense did you get, if any, of the differences there compared with here?
Well, I think that whenever you go to America, there's a kind of very kind of bracingly different kind of sense. So in the UK, we're often, can be a bit shifty about asking people for what we want. Whereas there, it's very much, hi, I'm so-and-so. What can you do for me? And what can I do for you? It's very, very upfront, which is rather refreshing. And part of that, what I was very struck by were the number of very senior women of colour as they call them there, lots of very impressive black women with very senior roles in big global corporations. And thinking about the UK and the similar kind of conferences I attend here, you see very few of those. So there's a very different kind of debate. It's much more, diversity is not just about women, which is kind of where we're stuck in the UK. It's about gays and lesbians and transgender people, and it's about ethnic minorities too.
Can I ask you as well about this idea of people having it all? I quoted Anne-Marie Slaughter right at the start, who was at the US State Department, the first woman to get to the position that she did in that department. And then she has now said, and I quote, "It's time to stop fooling ourselves. The women who have managed to be both mothers and top professionals are superhuman rich or self-employed." The implication being you can't have it all. Is she right?
Well, I think you can probably have it all over the series of a career. I think it's very hard to have it all at the same time. I'm a mother of 2 little girls myself. It's hard. You feel that all women talk about this. You feel the tension between work and home, and I don't think it's possible to be in the office, 14 hours a day doing the kind of extreme jobs that we're expected to do now, and to be the kind of parent that many of us want to be. And certainly, what I see around my peers is a lot of very highly educated women deciding to take, maybe work kind of 3 or 4 days a week, rather than really having their foot full down on the tiller while their children are small.
Which is about the work-life balance that Andrew Hill of the FT spoke about at the start of the programme, and that's across the board. That's a male issue as well as a female issue, isn't it?
Well, I think a lot of men say it's a male issue as well. I have to say, looking around the men I know, I don't think it is as much of a male issue. I mean, I look at my brother who has 2 small children, and he just doesn't feel as kind of viscerally connected to them as I do. And I'm not saying that all men are like that, but I think the kind of very highly driven alpha chaps are not agonising that they're not at the school gate in the way that equivalent women do. And I think that I think it's very true that a high-powered, high-paid woman can hire a nanny or a housekeeper to do all that domestic stuff, but I think a lot of them don't want to. I was interviewing a very high up investment banker the other day, and she said that she'd spent 5 years, 3 small children, and she never knew what was in her own fridge. She didn't know anybody at the school gate. And I don't think that for a lot of women that's what success looks like. I think a lot of people look at those kind of women and they think, actually, I actively do not want to be that person. And that's certainly what I've seen around my own friends and some of the choices that I've made myself. That's not the kind of mother I want to be. And I think a lot of us who had mothers who were in that kind of first wave, who were very successful, perhaps have also reacted against that a bit.
Well, here's an interesting view. Graham writes, can we dispel this illusion that women can't have it all and men can? Men are socially conditioned to provide for their family at the expense of that family, so most men do that. Men are not seen as equal as family carers as much as women are denied opportunities in the workplace. Graham's point of view via SMS. Joanna Tall has a solicitor's perspective on this. Joanna, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
What was your point here?
Well, I encountered similar barriers in terms of I used to work in the city in a big corporate law firm and found the working conditions completely inflexible, and I tried to work 3 days a week and found I was actually given 5 days worth of work. So I took a conscious decision to break out of that and set up my own law firm, specializing in female entrepreneurs with a working completely around the concept of being family friendly. So what does family friendly mean in practice? Family friendly to me is working from home and at hours to suit you around your children. So my team of lawyers all work from their homes. We're connected by internet and through by computer, but they can often get emails from them at sort of 11 at night when everyone's been put to bed, or very early in the morning, and they really love having that flexibility and seem to, give me 150% because they can be a lawyer and a mum at the same time.
And Frankie, can I bring you back in on that? Because there clearly is a fear among some that if you operate like that as a business, that somehow the business will suffer.
Yes, and that's the paradox, because actually businesses perform better when their workers are allowed to work flexibly.
And is there concrete evidence for that?
Yes, absolutely. There was actually just a study released last week by the ILM, the Institute of Leadership and Management, which is a partner institute with the Chartered Management Institute. And we ourselves have shown the links that cultures that are managed more flexibly perform better, so they have a higher productivity. The number that we quote is a 30%, up to 30% increase in productivity.
Right. Joanna, thank you for your call. Mike Buchanan's on his mobile. Mike, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
You set up the campaign for merit in business, I believe.
That's right, about 12 or 13 months ago.
And what does that aim to do?
Okay. It aims to fight the government's threats of quotas for more women on corporate boards, because longitudinal studies show that when more women are appointed to the boards of major companies, their financial performance declines.
Based on how many companies?
Thousands. I mean, this is companies in Norway, Germany, and the US.
But you're talking about Norway, which is generally put at the top of the league table when it comes to the way companies perform and the way they approach women, the way they employ women, and the way they prosper as a result.
Well, yes, but the impact of quotas for women on corporate boards, in fact, it was 40% in Norway, has had a marked negative impact on Norwegian companies' performance. And in fact, only this morning, I learned that a statement that was made by a lady to a House of Commons inquiry on which I also sat, she had claimed that the quotas had no impact on the performance of Norwegian companies, and she has since retracted that to admit that it has had a negative impact.
And Franke, your organisation quoted as well, I think, what PricewaterhouseCoopers had to say on this subject, which was where Norway was cited. What's your view on what you've just heard?
Well, I think we can't mix up the indisputable evidence that companies that have women in senior leadership positions and on boards outperform those who don't.
Well, you say it's indisputable. We've just had it disputed.
Well, no, what he was actually saying, and there is evidence to say that there was a setback in Norwegian companies when they imposed the quotas. So there has been a small decline in the economic performance.
Well,
so it's the quotas. But let me counter that with, for example, the recent study by Credit Suisse, 2,400 companies across the globe, and indeed those with diversity, women in the board, grew 40% more than those without.
Okay, I want to bring Mike back in. Mike.
Yes, thank you. We've done a critique of the Credit Suisse report and other reports like McKinsey, and all those reports make it extremely clear that what they're reporting is correlation. They are not reporting causation.
But does that really matter?
It does, because there are very good reasons why there's a correlation between more women on boards and financial performance, and it's basically that more successful companies can better afford to engage in social engineering. If women really caused if women really caused companies to be more successful financially, then longitudinal studies would show that, and five studies show the complete opposite.
Presumably, Mike, you're not arguing against women getting onto the boards when they do so on merit?
Of course not, absolutely not.
So it's just the quota issue that you have a particular issue with?
Yes, because it's driving poorly qualified women onto boards. It's basically saying that you'll put forward a woman onto a board rather than a number of better qualified men. And the reason that there are the pool of well qualified men is a lot deeper than the pool of well-qualified women. It's very well known.
I sense heavy sighing from various quarters. Julie, no, so hold on a second, Mike, because I'll get you back in a moment, I promise. Julie Verity, you were the one who said you were in favour of quotas.
Yes.
Whether or not you're upset by some of the elements of the argument you just heard, the point that says you will surely push people into jobs because of their gender rather than their ability is an undeniable one here, is it not?
Do we ever ask why men have got to the board and whether they are performing brilliant performers or excellent quality? Men don't know the proportion, the reason why they've been promoted, how much of that is to do with them just being a man, nothing to do with their abilities.
Well, and if you look at the ethical implosions at the top of many British companies, we have some pretty overt evidence that they've made some pretty bad mistakes. There's some pretty bad management up there.
Mike Buchanan, a final crack from you, then I'll move it on.
Yes, we always have this, no one ever talks about the 99 out of the 100 companies that men lead and do very well. The female CEO...
99. Where did that statistic come from?
I think he's a really good example of the problem.
Go on, Mike. I'm with you for a moment.
The female CEO of Anglo American presided over a period of a number of years in which £9 billion was wiped off shareholder value. And you never hear people talk about that.
Yeah, okay. Well, we could bat companies that fail and succeed around until we're blue in the face.
But
I'm
I
not sure
would
that
like
gets us
to
very
mention something that is very well respected. It's a study called Roads to Ruin, which looks at the 20 biggest corporate disasters since 2000. And indeed, one of the causes of that is this lack of diverse leadership at the top. So it isn't just about growing companies with more women, it's about preventing the downside.
Okay. Mike, thank you for your call. I'm very glad you called. I'm not sure that Anne and Julie were, but Keith or Eleanor, indeed. Yeah. Keith Pollyblank in Brixham. Good afternoon, Keith.
Good afternoon, June. Yes, I'd like to just flag up just briefly women that are in the medical profession who want to progress to consultancy status. If their child want to bring up a family, they find it very hard to, when they withdraw, to go back in and to climb the professional ladder. That is something that should be mindful of. I also like to flag up the issue of, I think it's a generational thing. I think younger people may not think as people in their late 40s, 50s and 60s on this issue. And I think younger male workers may be prepared to withdraw from the workforce and parenting and then eventually go back into the workforce. And likewise, if they have a partner, be it a wife or a partner, who is more successful, they may be prepared to allow their wife or partner to succeed in their profession, and they will take a back seat and rear the family.
Okay, Keith, thanks for making the point. Lindsay Graham's on her mobile. Lindsay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm very well. What did you want to say on this?
I just wanted to share a little story of something that happened to me just before Christmas. I'm a member of the Institute of Directors, and I run a small consultancy travelling the UK advising government agencies, and I'd been invited to an event by the Institute of Directors at the House of Commons. I went there, and it was and they're great at supporting women in business, so I have to say that. I went to this event, and there must have been about 100 men there, and probably between 14 and 20 women. And I was standing at a desk talking to an executive, chief executive, in fact, a chairman of a very successful company in the UK. And an MP came over, I won't say what party, but an MP came over, and he looked at me and said, "What do you do?" And I explained what I did. And then he looked at the gentleman and said, "What do you do?" And the gentleman said what he did. And then he said to the gentleman, "And what's your turnover?" And the chap said what his turnover was, and he immediately ignored me. I was just completely blocked out of the conversation, which I thought, you don't know anything about me, you don't know who I am, what I do, or anything like that. He just totally ignored me and spoke to this gentleman. What I took from that was these are an MP who influences our policy and practice in the country, and he totally dismissed the fact that I was who I was, and I presume it was because I was a woman. Incidentally, at the end of the event, he came over and apologised to me, and I thought, you knew straight away, matey, what you had done. And I got asked out on a date by the other guy.
Right. Did you go?
I did, actually. It was very nice, thank you.
Was it a good date? And what do you think prompted the apology?
I think he knew what he had done. And incidentally, the women that I met there were inspirational women, absolutely inspirational, doing a fantastic job for this country. And the men that I met probably, about half a dozen of them, and I thought were interesting, but not nearly as dynamic and wonderful as the women that I met.
Eleanor Mills, have you come across a situation like that?
Oh, yeah, I went to quite a smart dinner the other day, and I sat down, and the chap next to me said, "What does your husband do?" was his first question. And I said, well, why don't you go and ask him? He's sitting over there, but you might ask me what I do. But so I think that there's a lot of that around. I mean, I must say I was really shocked by that. So no, I think that's very obvious. But I think that there's a bigger debate here. We talk about what women kind of can and can't do, and I completely agree with that previous caller who said that often when you go to these things, the women are much more impressive than the men. And it talks back to your chap who was very anti-women on boards, who was saying that women would only get there.
He was
because they were
anti-quotas.
selected.
He wasn't anti-women on boards. He was anti-quotas.
He sounded quite anti-women. But,
okay, well, that's for you to decide.
It's certainly true that the kind of women who make it to the top have to be so outstandingly brilliant. I think it was Baroness Williams who said that when there are lots of mediocre women on boards, we'll know that we've made it, because there certainly are a lot of men. But I think that there's a bigger problem here about what success actually looks like for women and what women want to do. And I think that a lot of the beginning of feminism and women making it in the workplace was about being as good as any man. And I think for my generation, they're kind of going, well, we want different things. We want to do it in a different way. I think that the woman who runs a solicitor's firm where they can work more flexibly as suits them, that's what I see the successful women I know doing, the ones who have lives where they kind of do have a balance. They work very hard, but they work within their own time. That's why women leave big organisations to set up their own things. And that I think is the way forward. I call them the kind of BlackBerry mums, and I know legions of them, and I think they're the real powerhouse of the future. And we also need ways for women who come out of the workforce for a while to go back in again, what Sylvia Hewlett again calls on-ramps and off-ramps. And younger men who come out of the workforce to look after their kids are also going to need those on-ramps again. And at the moment, they really don't exist.
Let's go back to the phone-in room. Pauline has more.
Quite a big backlash, Julian, against the comment that men do all the dirty jobs. An example here, Sarah, she says, I've only recently found a garage I'm comfortable taking my car to, for fear of being confronted by breasts on calendars and patronising men. Women do, however, work in care homes, nurseries and most cleaning jobs, dealing with human waste, etc. I'd call that pretty dirty work. Angela Dickinson, on that point about our descriptions of all of this, she says, I think we need to rethink the rhetoric. Having it all is an impossible notion. It carries with it the sneer of the ridiculous. I'm fairly sure the phrase must have been coined by a misogynist. Doing well, she says, is enough for most men. And Sarah Khan on Twitter, when a competitive woman becomes a mother, her desire for success shifts to success for her children. And Liz emails, there is always a woman behind every great man. Women just aren't so lucky to have a strong person behind them.
Pauline, thank you. Angela Knight is the Chief Executive of Energy UK, having previously held the same role at the British Bankers Association, and prior to that she was a Conservative MP. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and prior to that I was several years in engineering, and to pick up from one of the comments earlier, in the dirty end of engineering.
And in banking, we had a caller in banking earlier on, I don't know whether you heard her, who said that she was being held back by other women.
No, I didn't hear her, but I have heard that said from time to time, and I think it's very, very sad when it is said. But I think overwhelmingly the women do, really encourage the other women to come forward, and it's that is where the thrust comes from, and especially if you've sort of encountered difficulties yourself. I mean, I'm sadly getting on a bit now. I wish I wasn't quite as old as I am, and I've seen huge attitudes that change and many more doors open, but there's still quite a lot more to do. And I think it was Eleanor who's just said that women do look at jobs sometimes in a different way, and how to fit a business that they're running together with their family and other responsibilities is quite innovative. And I hope that really is the way that things are going to go, and because the attitude do need to continue to change. And I think the younger women, the younger men coming through, if they see that success can operate in a different way, if they see that companies can be managed in all sorts of different ways and run in all sorts of different ways, and that's right, then that will really be a very good thing to take place.
I suspect I know the answer to this, but would you be in favour of quotas on boards?
No, I'm not in favour of quotas, but I am in favour of some of those propositions which are really about targets. Now, there is a bit of a difference between them, and I think that if you're on the board of a company, and I do sit on the board of some PLCs and have done for a number of years, I think if you are there, you need to look very carefully at your recruitment process, your training process, how you promote people, to make sure that there's no barriers that are in the way of women that are either sort of overt or covert, and to really encourage the women to come forward and make it feel to them that the fact that they might have children and that things do happen at home doesn't stand against them, and aim for those targets. And I think that really does open up some of the doors rather better. It doesn't put people in place who shouldn't be in place, but it takes down the barriers, it gives the encouragement, and it brings those great people who can be wonderfully successful forward. And other times in other ways they may not have been encouraged to do that job and take that position.
I want to squeeze some final callers in because I'm conscious of the clock. Ruth Furlong in Cardiff. Ruth, good afternoon. Briefly, if you could.
Yes. My point really was that there's covert and overt sexism in the workplace, particularly institutions and universities, which I come from. I've retired, but it carries on into retirement. And one answer would be to make salaries open, which successive governments are avoiding, because I was in the situation where I was much more qualified than young men who were being taken on in sort of IT-like subjects or art or design or whatever. And I just slowly discovered they said, I'm not coming unless you give me so-and-so. I've just come out of an IT company, da-da-da. So they were earning far more than me.
Unfortunately, that's true across the board.
Yeah.
And still, even in academia, the vast number of faculty positions go to men and not to women.
Yeah, and then you see, it's all, they look squeaky clean because they've got loads of rules and regulations. And when you come to retirement, which I've just done, my husband worked for sort of top universities, me for middly lesser ones, even though I've worked all my life. And then he's now got all these networks of publishing companies and books, and where I was just cut off dead. Do you see what I mean?
I do. Ruth, I'm going to say thank you and move it on, simply because I want to squeeze one more call in, if I may. Eileen Milner's on her mobile. And again, Eileen, up to a point, a bit of brevity would be much appreciated, but please make your point.
Well, my point is that
There's a studio there, because it's so much...
Sorry, go on.
I'm a senior woman in the technology industry. I'm lucky that I've managed to get to near the top of a tough industry for women. But my point really was I've got a pre-teenage daughter. Just listening into their friendship groups, I think they have looked at my generation of women who have aspired to do what Sheryl Sandberg says, and that's the have it all. Not just you can have it all, but you should work to have it all. And they've kind of looked at it and said, well, we don't much like that, really. The compromises and the difficulties just look too hard. And so I come back to the fact that what she's talking about is perhaps a broken model, and that we need to role model something slightly different where women can be good role models to other women and to their daughters.
And do you applaud the conclusion that they have reached in that context?
I don't applaud it. I'm slightly worried about it because I've tried to be a good role model. I'm unusual in as much as I work at a senior level, but I work part-time and my organisation is supportive of that. But I then look at myself and think, what have I done wrong?
Eileen, I'm going to say thank you and bring things to a delicate end. Thank you very much for the call. Angela Knight, thank you. Anne Franke, Julie Verity, thank you. Eleanor Mills, thank you as well for your contributions, and to everybody who got in touch. Judging by what I'm reading on one screen, quite a heated debate is going on in various social media circles on the strength of what we've been talking about.